Usually, when you sit down with a cup of coffee and open up the morning news, you read these headlines about border disputes or
Yeah,
treaties.
or like the rise of some new political leader.
Right,
Uh,
exactly. And you just see it as politics, like
I,
just the natural maneuvering of nations, right?
which is, I mean, that's the standard way we all process the world.
Yeah.
We look at the secular gears turning, driven by human ambition, economics, diplomacy, all of that.
But when you step into the world of biblical eschatology, which is the theology of the end times,
Mm.
that entire framework just gets completely turned upside down.
Oh, completely. It's a massive paradigm shift.
It really is. Suddenly, it feels like someone handed you a pair of glasses that reveals like invisible ink written between the lines of those
Yeah,
newspapers.
that's a great way to put it.
Because you are no longer looking at random political events. You're looking at this ancient, highly orchestrated script unfolding in real time.
And that is exactly the fundamental shift in perspective we are exploring today. It moves the whole geopolitical narrative from just a, chaotic sequence of global events into a very precise, predetermined countdown.
Right. And deciphering that invisible script is basically the mission of today's deep dive. So whether you are a theology buff, a geopolitics nerd, or, honestly, just intensely curious about how ancient prophecies are being interpreted by millions of people today.
To make sense of the modern world, yeah.
Exactly. This deep dive is going to provide some serious aha moments for you. We are unpacking a fascinating, highly complex, and frankly, very controversial lecture on pre-rapture events, ancient texts, and how some scholars tie them directly to modern Middle Eastern conflicts.
But before we delve into the mechanics of this timeline, we really need to establish a very firm boundary for the conversation.
Yes, thank you for bringing that up. That is a crucial point. The source material we are examining today contains highly politically and religiously charged viewpoints.
Very charged.
Yeah. Specifically, the author makes sweeping, controversial claims regarding Israel, Palestinian refugees, and the religion of Islam. So we want to be crystal clear with you, the listener. We are absolutely not taking sides here.
Right. We are not endorsing any of these geopolitical or religious views, not at all.
No. Our job today is strictly analytical. We are impartially reporting on what is contained within this source text.
We're just exploring the framework, right?
Yeah.
The arguments the author presents so you can understand the lens through which a significant portion of the world views modern events. We are outlining the theory, we're not validating it.
Exactly. So, with that neutral framework firmly in place, let's lay the groundwork. Everything in the source material hinges on a specific chronological anchor. So, what is the overarching timeline here?
Okay, so the central anchor for this eschatological framework is a period scholars call the 70th week of Daniel.
Okay.
And in this prophetic context, a week doesn't mean 7 days. It represents a 7-year period. So the 7-year block is the climactic focal point of end times prophecy.
Right, the big finale.
But it's not a uniform 7 years. It is distinctly split right down the middle into 2 3.5-year halves.
With the second half being the one that, historically gets all the cultural attention. So-
Precisely. The source notes that Jesus himself actually labeled that second half the Great Tribulation. And it's described across multiple books of the Bible as a period of just unprecedented global upheaval.
Okay. Wow.
However, the author's primary focus today is on what happens right before we reach that 7-year period. The preparatory steps, basically. The
Yeah.
setting of the geopolitical chessboard.
Which brings us to the regional wars, because before we even reach the tribulation, the source outlines these massive conflicts that have to happen first to kind of set the stage.
Right.
And the big one that prophecy scholars usually point to is the Magog invasion, which is detailed in Ezekiel chapters 38 and 39.
Yeah, the Magog invasion is a huge cornerstone in these theological circles. Ezekiel describes this massive alliance of nations, and they're listed by ancient names like Persia, Cush, Put, Libya, and Gomer.
So North Africa and the Middle East, basically.
Yeah, and they form what the author calls an outer ring around Israel. Now, according to the text, they invade not necessarily to conquer territory, but specifically to take spoil.
Spoil, like resources.
Exactly. Silver, gold, cattle, natural resources. But the prophecy states that God directly intervenes with fire and hailstones to thwart the invasion.
Okay, we need to pause here, though, because there is a glaring geographical and frankly logical issue with this.
Oh, for sure.
I mean, we live in an age of drones and intercontinental ballistic missiles. Why are we assuming these ancient geographical rings like immediate neighbors versus distant neighbors still dictate the sequence of a modern war.
That's a very fair point.
Right. Couldn't a distant nation just launch a missile over the neighboring countries without them even needing to be involved?
That is a completely valid modern critique. But the author argues that the prophecy isn't just about weapon trajectories, right? It's about the specific alliances, the actual ground invasions, and most importantly, the motives outlined in the text. Furthermore, there is a geographical contradiction in Ezekiel that prophecy scholars have debated for literally centuries. Ezekiel 38 explicitly states that this outer ring of nations will attack Israel when it is a land of unwalled villages, like living securely and at peace.
Which does not describe modern Israel at all.
Not even close.
I mean, they have a 430-mile, 25-foot-high security barrier. They are decidedly not living in unwalled villages.
Right, and that is the exact contradiction the author highlights. If we connect this to the bigger picture, the author argues that the Magog invasion physically cannot happen right now because the regional conditions just aren't met.
Oh, interesting.
And noticeably absent from Ezekiel's list of invaders are Israel's immediate next-door neighbors.
Right, the outer ring is there, but not the inner ring.
Exactly. The Palestinians, the Lebanese, the Syrians, the Jordanians. Why aren't they part of this massive invasion force?
So the author's answer is that those immediate neighbors are missing from Ezekiel 38 because they are dealt with in an entirely different preceding prophecy, which is Psalm 83.
That is the crux of the theory right there. The author maps the ancient names in Psalm 83, so the tents of Edom, the Ishmaelites, Tyre, Philistia, directly onto modern groups like Palestinian refugees, Hezbollah, Hamas, and neighboring Arab states.
The inner ring.
Exactly. This forms the inner ring.
And their motivation is completely different from the Magog invaders. Because the outer ring in Ezekiel, they want spoil, right? The resources. But the inner ring in Psalm 83, the text says, "Come, let us cut them off from being a nation, that the name of Israel may be no more in remembrance."
Yeah, it's chilling.
It really is. It's not an economic war at all. It is a war of total annihilation.
And according to the author's interpretation, this inner ring will launch a devastating war first. But Israel will decisively defeat them.
Okay.
The theory suggests this victory will significantly expand Israel's borders and basically neutralize their immediate regional threats. And that is what allows them to finally take down their security walls and dwell securely.
Oh, wow. So that effectively hits the reset button on Middle Eastern geopolitics. They clear the inner ring, they take down the walls, and then that creates the geopolitical vacuum.
Yes.
And it creates this false sense of security that eventually draws the outer ring, the Magog invasion, in for the wealth later on.
Correct. But tucked inside that Psalm 83 theory is a very particular textual mystery.
Oh.
Yeah. The psalm mentions these inner ring enemies consulting together against God's hidden ones. And the literal Hebrew translates to hidden treasured ones.
Right. And the author offers this fascinating kind of quirky conjecture on this. The texts suggest that these hidden ones might actually be raptured Christians.
Yeah, it's a huge claim.
Meaning they are literally hidden away while this inner ring war breaks out on Earth.
It's a massive chronological shift, because if true, it places the rapture right alongside the Psalm 83 regional war, before the 7-year countdown even begins.
Okay, let's unpack this timeline a bit more, because if these regional wars clear the geopolitical board, it paves the way for a single global leader to step into the vacuum. And that is the trigger for the 70th week of Daniel. But before we look at this leader, we really need to understand the mechanics of the timeline itself. We keep referencing this exact 3.5-year period. Where does that mathematical number actually come from in the ancient texts?
So this requires a bit of a linguistic deep dive.
I love these.
In the books of Daniel and Revelation, you repeatedly see this highly unusual phrasing. It says, time, times, and half a time.
Which, to a modern English reader, just sounds like poetic ambiguity, right? Like, what does times mean? Does it mean 2 times? A dozen times?
Right, and this is where understanding ancient grammar really illuminates the text. Because in modern English, we primarily use singular and plural, one tree or multiple trees.
Sure.
But Biblical Hebrew and Aramaic operate entirely differently.
Yeah.
They feature singular, plural, and a specific grammatical form called the dual.
Yes, and the source offers such an excellent way to conceptualize this. It would be like saying in English, all my friends came over last night, both of them.
Huh, exactly.
The word both functions like a dual. It implies exactly 2. No more, no less.
That perfectly illustrates it. When the ancient text says time, times, and half a time, the word times is written in the dual form. It literally dictates exactly 2 times.
Wow.
So you have 1 time plus 2 times plus half a time. 1 plus 2 plus 0.5 equals exactly 3.5.
So it is not poetic ambiguity at all. It is mathematical precision embedded right there in the grammar.
Precisely.
And the author points out another really intriguing grammatical quirk regarding this too. The Hebrew word for God used in Genesis 1, Elohim, is grammatically plural. But in Hebrew, unlike the dual form, a true plural doesn't mean two or more. It strictly means three or more.
Right.
So the author argues the very grammar of the word implies a trinity right from the very first sentence of the text.
It just showcases how deeply theology is tied to the actual mechanics of the original languages. But returning to our timeline, this 3.5-year precision dictates the reign of the figure running the 70th week. Culturally, he's widely known as the Antichrist.
Though the author prefers a much more descriptive, kind of funny nickname,
Yeah,
Mr. Big Mouth.
it's quite the title.
Because across Daniel, Psalms, and Thessalonians, this figure is constantly characterized by his arrogant, boastful claims. He is an oratorical genius. But the cultural understanding of the term Antichrist is also challenged by the source material here.
It is heavily misunderstood, actually. The word Antichrist is only ever used by the Apostle John in his letters. It surprisingly never appears in the book of Revelation at all.
Wait, really?
Never.
Never. Furthermore, in the original Greek, the prefix anti in Antichristos doesn't primarily mean against Christ, like an opponent. It actually means in the place of Christ.
So he is a pseudo-Christ, like a brilliant imitator.
Exactly. The author portrays him as this intellectual and political savant, someone who comes to power offering a brilliant peace plan when the world is just reeling from these regional wars we talked about. Yet he isn't presented as physically flawless, which is interesting. The source pulls a really chilling physical description from Zechariah 11, referring to him as an idle shepherd. Yeah.
It prophesies that a sword will be upon his arm and his right eye. His arm will be clean dried up and his right eye utterly darkened.
The implication there is a severe physical impairment, right?
Okay.
A paralyzed right arm and a blinded right eye. Perhaps surviving an assassination attempt, which, would only add to his miraculous messianic aura among his followers.
Oh, for sure. Like he rose from the dead. And he uses this massive political capital to enforce a specific covenant with Israel for 1 week, that 7-year period.
Right.
And this covenant apparently allows the Jewish people to rebuild their temple in Jerusalem and restart traditional sacrifices.
Which holds the piece together right up until the midpoint. Exactly 3.5 years in, that dual grammar kicks in and the timeline pivots.
The honeymoon is over.
Yeah, he breaks the deal and commits an act referred to as the abomination of desolation.
Okay, we hear that phrase a lot in these eschatology discussions. But what does that actually look like on the ground? Because the phrase itself sounds deeply archaic. Well, in biblical terms, an abomination fundamentally refers to idolatry. So the abomination of desolation is the act of putting an idol in the most insulting, sacrilegious place imaginable.
The Holy of Holies.
Exactly. Inside that newly rebuilt temple in Jerusalem, effectively desecrating it completely.
To put that in a modern context, it would be like an invading army conquering Washington, D.C., and not just burning the Constitution, but literally forcing the remaining citizens to worship the invading general statue right on the floor of the Senate.
That's a visceral image.
It is an act of total subjugation and profound desecration. And the author stresses that we know exactly how this plays out because history is looping. Like, this event has a historical precedent.
That historical loop is vital to the author's theory. Because when Jesus referenced the abomination of desolation as a future event, he was pointing his audience back to something they already knew intimately.
Yeah.
In 167 BC, a Syrian Greek ruler named Antiochus Epiphanes conquered Jerusalem. And he didn't just take the city. He set up a statue of Zeus in the Holy of Holies. And to add the ultimate insult, he sacrificed a pig on the sacred Jewish altar.
Wow.
And he made reading the Torah punishable by death.
And that level of extreme desecration triggered a massive pushback. The Jewish people rebelled under what became known as the Maccabean Revolt.
Right.
They fought this brutal, protracted guerrilla war, eventually threw off the Greek Empire, and then spent significant time meticulously cleansing and rededicating the temple. And that rededication is exactly the historical event that the holiday of Hanukkah celebrates to this day.
And the source highlights a very surprising detail regarding this that bridges the Old and New Testaments. Because Hanukkah is not one of the original feasts established by Moses.
It came way later.
Yeah, it was established during the intertestamental period, yet it is explicitly referenced in the New Testament, specifically in John 10:22, where Jesus is described as walking in the temple during the Feast of Dedication.
which is Hanukkah, and the author suggests that this inclusion is entirely deliberate. It signals to readers that the themes of Hanukkah, desecration by a dictator, faithful resistance, and ultimate rededication, are the exact prophetic templates for the end times.
So if this global leader replicates the actions of Antiochus and demands worldwide worship, we arrive at the mechanism of how he marks his followers.
Yes.
And this is where the source takes a massive, highly controversial departure from traditional Western eschatology. We need to discuss the mark of the beast.
Here's where it gets really interesting, because the infamous 666 for decades, popular culture and prophecy scholars have interpreted this mark through the lens of emerging technology.
Always technology.
Yeah. In the 1980s, it was barcodes. Then it became microchips, RFID tags, or, most recently, centralized digital currency. The prevailing assumption has always been that it's an economic control mechanism tied to a numeric database.
Right. But the author challenges this premise entirely. The source argues that the mark is not about a personal bank account number or economic tracking. It is fundamentally a badge of servitude to this leader's identity.
Okay.
And then the source tackles the number 666 itself. Traditionally, scholars arrive at this number using Greek gematria, which is the ancient practice of assigning numerical values to letters.
Right. A is 1, B is 2, that sort of thing.
Exactly. And in Greek, the letters chi, she, and stigma correspond to 600, 60, and 6.
But the source introduces a deeply controversial alternative theory here, put forward by a man named Walid Shoebat. He's a former radicalized Muslim who converted to Christianity.
Yes.
And his theory hinges on a very specific instruction given in the book of Revelation. The Apostle John was told to write down exactly what he saw, not what he heard, but the visual image.
Yeah, and this is crucial. Shoebat examined the oldest known Greek manuscripts of Revelation, like the Codex Vaticanus from around 350 AD. He looked at how those three specific Greek letters, chi, she, and stigma, were actually drawn on the parchment. And he makes a startling assertion. He argues that John, writing 6 centuries before the birth of Islam, wasn't writing Greek letters at all.
Wait!
He was drawing a visual approximation of a foreign script he simply didn't understand.
Oh, wow. This requires a bit of auditory imagination for you listening to picture this. If you look at that ancient manuscript, the first symbol looks like a capital X. The middle symbol looks like a squiggly line, almost like a backward 3 with a tail.
Right.
And the final symbol looks like a cursive S. Now, Greek is read from left to right, but Shoebat argues that if you look at those symbols and read them from right to left, the way Arabic is read, they transform.
They do, exactly. When viewed from right to left, those specific pen strokes look nearly identical to the Arabic script for Bismillah, which translates to, in the name of Allah.
That is mind-blowing. And that final Greek letter, the stigma that looks like a cursive S, visually mirrors 2 crossed swords, which is the universal symbol of Islam. So Shoebat's theory is that it isn't the number 666 at all. It is a visual transcription of an Arabic war cry and religious symbol.
And Shoebat grounds this theory by tying it directly to modern Islamic tradition. He points to the Shahada, which is the Islamic declaration of faith.
Right.
During times of jihad or holy war, it is incredibly common for fundamentalist warriors to wear the Shahada on headbands across their foreheads or on armbands on their right arm.
Which chillingly aligns with the prophecy in Revelation that the mark of allegiance will be taken on the forehead or the right arm.
The author notes that if this visual translation is accurate, it completely dismantles the traditional European, Roman Empire-centric view of the Antichrist that has dominated Western theology for centuries.
So why did Western scholars miss this for so long?
Well, the author argues it's a matter of geographic bias. For centuries, biblical scholarship was centered in Europe. Naturally, European scholars assumed the ultimate antagonist would be a revived Roman emperor. They were looking through a Western lens.
That makes sense.
But the author argues that John was writing from the Middle East, about the Middle East. If true, this shifts the entire geographic and religious focus of the apocalypse squarely back to the Middle East.
And this brings us to the author's overarching geopolitical paradigm. And it is here we must firmly reiterate our neutrality.
Absolutely.
We are examining the author's specific, highly controversial framework. Through this lens, the Antichrist is not some slick European diplomat operating out of Brussels. He is a Middle Eastern, likely Muslim leader.
Right.
The author links this to ancient prophecies, calling the ultimate enemy the Assyrian, tracing the lineage of rebellion all the way back to Nimrod, the original tyrant king of Babel.
And the source material is uncompromising in his view of Islam here. The author makes the stark claim that Islam is not a religion of peace, but essentially a warrior code whose ultimate theological goal is global subjugation under Sharia law.
Wow.
Furthermore, the source claims that the God of Islam, Allah, is actually an ancient moon god, completely distinct from the God of the Bible.
The author also asserts that Islamic tradition actively encourages religiously sanctioned deceit as a tactical maneuver.
Yes.
To support this, the source references historical treaties made by Muhammad and later modern leaders like Yasser Arafat, claiming they made peace treaties only as tactical delays until their forces were strong enough to wipe out their enemies.
And this raises an important question within the author's framework, because that historical pattern perfectly mirrors the actions of the Antichrist, who makes a brilliant 7-year peace covenant, only to treacherously break it at the 3.5-year mark once his power is consolidated.
It is a stark, absolute worldview. The author sees current Middle Eastern tensions not merely as modern disputes over land, borders, or water rights, but as the continuation of a cosmic, ancient war between the God of Abraham and an ancient adversary currently hiding behind modern religion.
In this paradigm, every news alert, every border skirmish, and every treaty from the Middle East is viewed as a script rehearsal for the 70th week of Daniel.
So what does this all mean for you, the listener? Why should you spend time understanding debates over ancient Greek papyri, Hebrew grammar, or visual translations of the Book of Revelation, especially if you aren't personally religious?
It's a great question.
You should care because theology does not exist in a vacuum. This eschatological framework, this specific interpretation of Psalm 83, the Magog invasion, and a Middle Eastern antagonist, it shapes the political worldview of millions of people globally.
It undeniably dictates voting habits. It drives massive lobbying efforts. It determines which foreign policies, treaties, and military interventions citizens will actively support or protest.
Exactly.
For millions of people, this isn't abstract ancient theology. It is the definitive, non-negotiable roadmap of human history. They are making concrete geopolitical decisions today based entirely on what they believe must inevitably happen tomorrow.
It truly is the invisible ink they use to read the daily news.
I will leave you with a final thought to mull over regarding how we interact with these ancient texts. For decades, Western prophecy scholars looked at the Book of Revelation and saw 1980s barcodes or modern computer chips.
Right.
Their interpretation of the mark was heavily filtered through the anxieties of a rapidly digitizing capitalist Western world. Now, this author looks at the exact same ancient text and sees modern global terrorism in Arabic script, filtering the prophecy through the intense anxieties of the post-9/11 geopolitical landscape.
That is a really profound observation.
It makes you wonder, if prophecy acts as a mirror, reflecting the deepest fears, technological anxieties, and current events of the specific generation reading it, how will people 100 years from now look at these exact same verses? What entirely new invisible ink will they see?
That is a deeply fascinating question to end on. A huge thank you for joining us as we unpack the invisible script behind the headlines today. Until next time, keep questioning the narrative and keep diving deep.
Thanks for joining us on this hour on the Archive Hour. Join us on our next hour as we bring you more adventures from the Bible.